A millionaire found a girl with a baby at his gate. The secret he uncovered was devastating. This revelation changed everything forever. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. A heavy rain pelted against the wrought iron gates of Jonathan Carter's estate, the sound muffled by the thick ivy winding its way through the bars. Inside, the warmth of his opulent home barely touched him. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 10, marking another evening in a life that felt increasingly hollow. Jonathan, 58 and impeccably dressed even in solitude, poured himself a glass of scotch, the amber liquid catching the flicker of the fire in the hearth. The solitude of his routine was disrupted by the shrill buzz of the intercom near the gate. Rarely did anyone disturb him this late, and never in this weather. Frowning, he approached the security panel. A blurred figure appeared on the monitor, backlit by a flickering streetlight. "Who could it possibly be?" he muttered, toggling the audio. "Please," a trembling voice came through, barely audible above the rain. "I need help." Jonathan hesitated. The voice sounded young and desperate, but experience had taught him to be wary. He zoomed in on the camera feed, revealing a young woman standing barefoot, clutching a baby wrapped in a fraying blanket. Her hair clung to her face, and her shoulders trembled with cold. "Sir, shall I send her away?" Henry, his longtime butler, appeared in the doorway, his expression cautious. "No," Jonathan replied after a pause. Something in her posture, desperation mixed with determination, stirred an old, buried instinct in him. "Let her in." The gates creaked open, and the girl staggered toward the entrance. Jonathan opened the door himself, an unusual act for him. The cold wind swept into the foyer, carrying the scent of rain and something else he couldn't quite place. Fear, perhaps. "Come in," he said brusquely, gesturing toward the warmth of the interior. "Thank you," she whispered, stepping inside. Her eyes darted around the grand entryway, wide with a mix of awe and apprehension. The baby in her arms whimpered softly, its tiny fist clutching at the air. Jonathan motioned toward the sitting room, his voice gruff to mask his discomfort. "You'll need to explain yourself." Once seated, the girl introduced herself. "My name is Lily Harper. This is Oliver," she said, glancing down at the infant. Her voice wavered, but her grip on the child was firm. "Why are you here?" Jonathan asked, his tone sharper than intended. Lily hesitated, her lips trembling. "I didn't know where else to go." Someone told me you might help." Jonathan stiffened. "Who?" She shook her head, biting her lip as tears welled in her eyes. I can't say. Not yet." Frustration mingled with curiosity as Jonathan studied her. She couldn't have been more than 19, but there was a resilience in her gaze that belied her youth. The baby stirred, and Jonathan's eyes flicked to the child. For a fleeting moment, an image of his younger brother, William, as a child, flashed in his mind, though he quickly pushed the thought away. "Henry," he called. The butler appeared promptly. "Prepare something warm for them, and bring dry towels." Lily's face softened with gratitude, though she didn't relax entirely. As Henry disappeared into the kitchen, Jonathan returned his gaze to her. "You can stay tonight," he said finally, his voice low. "But come morning, you'll tell me everything." A spark of relief crossed her face, though her eyes still brimmed with worry. "Thank you," she murmured. As she settled into the warmth of the house, Jonathan stood by the window, watching the rain cascade down the panes. Something about Lily's presence unsettled him, though he couldn't yet name what it was. The storm outside mirrored the chaos he felt brewing inside. Tomorrow would bring answers, or so he hoped. For now, he would try to ignore the whisper of old memories stirred by the sight of the fragile child cradled in her arms. The morning light filtered through the heavy drapes of the sitting room, casting muted patterns on the polished oak floor. Jonathan stood at the threshold, watching the girl huddled on the oversized couch, clutching the baby as though her life depended on it. Her small frame seemed lost among the grandeur of the room. Lily stirred, startled, as Jonathan cleared his throat. Oliver let out a small whimper, but her gentle rocking calmed him almost instantly. "Good morning," Jonathan said, his tone clipped but not unkind. "I trust you slept well." Lily nodded, her eyes wary. "Thank you for letting us stay." Jonathan gestured toward the breakfast tray Henry had placed on the coffee table. Tea, toast, and a modest array of fruit. "Eat. Then we'll talk." The girl hesitated, but hunger eventually won. She picked up a piece of toast, breaking off small bites with trembling fingers. Jonathan sat across from her, observing her every move. "You said someone told you to come here," he began. "Who was it?" Lily froze, her hands gripping the plate. I can't say," she murmured, her gaze fixed on the baby in her lap. "You'll find I'm not a patient man," Jonathan said, leaning forward. "If you expect my help, you'll need to be honest with me." Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. "It's not that I don't want to tell you. It's just, I'm scared." "Of what?" he pressed. She bit her lip, hesitating. "Of what might happen if I do." Jonathan's jaw tightened. He leaned back, his fingers steepled as he studied her. She was hiding something significant. Yet he couldn't ignore the genuine fear etched on her face. Before he could probe further, the baby let out a cry. Lily cradled him closer, whispering soft reassurances. Jonathan watched as her demeanor shifted, her fear momentarily replaced by a fierce protectiveness. "Oliver," she said quietly, as though sensing his gaze, "he's everything I have." Jonathan frowned. "You said he's your brother. Where are your parents?" Her face crumpled, and for a moment he regretted the question. "They're gone," she whispered. "It's just me now." The weight of her words settled heavily in the room. Jonathan felt a pang of something, pity, perhaps, or recognition. He knew what it was like to carry the burden of family alone, though he'd never had to do so under such dire circumstances. "Why my house?" he asked finally. "Why not a shelter or someone else?" Lily hesitated again. "Because I was told you could protect us." "Protect you from what?" Jonathan's voice hardened. She didn't answer immediately. Her grip on Oliver tightened, and her lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't know who else to trust," she admitted at last, "but I promise I'm not here to hurt you or take advantage of you. I need time to figure things out." Jonathan considered her words carefully. There was a raw honesty in her voice, but it didn't quell his doubts. He wasn't a man to take risks, especially when the situation was shrouded in so many unknowns. Yet something held him back from turning her away. Perhaps it was the way she shielded the child, or the quiet determination in her voice despite her evident fear. Or maybe it was the faint echo of a memory he couldn't quite place, nagging at the edges of his mind. "Fine," he said, his voice low. "You can stay for now, but this is not permanent, and you will tell me the truth sooner or later." Relief washed over Lily's face, but it was fleeting. She nodded, her expression a mix of gratitude and lingering apprehension. As Jonathan rose to leave, he paused at the door. "And, Lily," he added, his tone firm, "don't make me regret this." She didn't reply, but the look in her eyes, equal parts gratitude and desperation, was answer enough. Jonathan left her to her breakfast, retreating to his study. His thoughts churned as he pored over the morning's events. Whatever Lily Harper was running from, it was clear that her story was far from over. And whether he liked it or not, he was now part of it. Jonathan's study was his sanctuary, a quiet, wood-paneled room filled with books that spanned decades of history, finance, and literature. The heavy leather chair behind his desk creaked as he leaned back, staring at a blank page in his notebook. He had opened it intending to make sense of the situation, yet no words came. Downstairs, the faint hum of Lily's voice reached his ears. She was singing softly to Oliver, the tune carrying a tenderness that pricked at something deep within him. Shaking off the unwelcome sentiment, Jonathan turned his attention to his planner. He wasn't a man who indulged disruptions. His life was meticulously ordered, his days planned down to the minute. The arrival of a young woman with a baby, both strangers, was an anomaly he didn't know how to manage. A knock at the study door broke his thoughts. "Come in," he said. Henry stepped inside, his usual composure tinged with hesitation. "Sir, I've brought some documents for your review." He placed a folder on the desk, but lingered, as though debating whether to say more. "What is it, Henry?" Jonathan asked, raising an eyebrow. The butler straightened. "About the young lady and the child. Do you believe it's wise to let them stay?" Jonathan's lips pressed into a thin line. Wise? Perhaps not. Necessary? For the moment, yes. Henry nodded, his face betraying no further opinion. "Very well, sir. Shall I arrange for additional security?" "Not yet," Jonathan replied. "But keep an eye on things. I want to know if anything seems off." "As you wish." Henry left the room, his quiet footsteps fading down the hall. Jonathan turned back to his planner, but the words blurred. He closed the notebook with a sigh, rubbing his temples. What was he doing? He didn't take in strays, didn't involve himself in other people's problems. And yet, here he was, his ordered life tilted by a girl and her infant. The sharp cry of Oliver pierced the air, jolting him from his thoughts. Jonathan rose instinctively, then hesitated. This wasn't his problem. He wasn't responsible for them. But the cries continued, and before he could stop himself, he was already descending the stairs. In the sitting room, Lily was pacing, bouncing Oliver gently in her arms. The baby's face was red, his wails echoing off the high ceilings. Jonathan stood in the doorway, watching as Lily tried in vain to soothe him. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice more gruff than he intended. Lily looked up, startled. I don't know what's wrong," she stammered. "He's fed, he's clean, he just won't stop crying." Jonathan stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he studied the scene. "May I?" he asked, extending his arms toward Oliver. Lily hesitated but nodded, carefully handing the baby to him. Jonathan hadn't held a child in decades, and the small weight in his arms felt both foreign and oddly familiar. He adjusted his grip awkwardly, rocking the baby gently. To his surprise, Oliver's cries began to subside, his tiny fist curling around Jonathan's shirt. Lily stared, her expression a mixture of relief and astonishment. "You're good with him," she said softly. Jonathan looked down at the baby, who was now staring up at him with wide, curious eyes. "Lucky guess," he muttered, though something about the moment unsettled him. As he handed Oliver back, Jonathan felt the walls he had carefully built around himself shift, ever so slightly. The vulnerability in Lily's eyes, the trust she had shown in letting him hold her brother, struck a chord he didn't want to acknowledge. "I'll be in my study," he said brusquely, retreating before the moment could linger. Back in the sanctuary of his study, Jonathan closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. He didn't want to be involved, didn't want to care, but the cries of the child and the quiet strength of the girl were beginning to chip away at his resolve. For years, he had kept his life orderly, his emotions locked away. Now, he felt the first stirrings of something he couldn't quite name, a pull toward a world he had long since left behind. The afternoon sun cast a pale glow across the estate's sprawling gardens. Jonathan sat in the conservatory, a cup of coffee growing cold on the table before him. The events of the morning lingered in his mind, an unwelcome disruption to his usual calm. The sound of Oliver's cries and the trust in Lily's eyes played on repeat, stirring questions he didn't want to answer. He had always prided himself on control over his business, his emotions, his life. Yet now, there was a girl and a baby under his roof, neither of whom fit into the world he had so meticulously constructed. A knock on the glass door drew his attention. Lily stood hesitantly, holding Oliver close. The baby was quiet now, his small face peaceful against her shoulder. "May I come in?" she asked softly. Jonathan nodded, gesturing to the chair across from him. Lily approached cautiously, as though afraid of disturbing his solitude. "Thank you for earlier," she began, her voice low. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stepped in." Jonathan dismissed her gratitude with a wave of his hand. "It was nothing. Babies cry. They stop eventually." Lily smiled faintly, though her eyes betrayed exhaustion. "It's more than that. You've already done so much for us, and you don't even know who we are." "That's true," Jonathan replied, his tone sharp. "And I'm beginning to wonder if that was a mistake." The words hung in the air, cutting through the fragile rapport they had begun to build. Lily's expression faltered, but she didn't look away. "I understand why you'd feel that way," she said after a moment, "but I promise I'm not here to cause trouble. I needed somewhere safe." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, his gaze piercing. "Safe from what, exactly? Or from whom?" Lily hesitated, her fingers tightening on the baby's blanket. "It's complicated," she murmured. "It always is," Jonathan said dryly. "But if you expect me to continue helping you, I need more than vague answers." Lily glanced down at Oliver, her brow furrowing. "I'm scared," she admitted, "not just for me, but for him. I can't lose him." Her voice cracked on the last word, and Jonathan felt an unwelcome pang of sympathy. He didn't know what it was like to care for a child, but he understood the fear of loss. It was a ghost that had followed him for years. "You're not going to lose him," he said, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "At least, not while you're here." Lily looked up, her eyes wide with gratitude and something else. Hope. "Thank you," she whispered. The moment was interrupted by Henry, who entered the conservatory with his usual quiet efficiency. "Excuse me, sir," he said, his voice calm but firm. "There's a man at the gate asking for Miss Harper." Lily froze, her face draining of color. "What?" Henry hesitated. "He claims to know her and insists on speaking with her." Jonathan's expression hardened. "Did he give a name?" "No, sir," Henry replied, "but he seems persistent." Lily's breathing quickened, her arms tightening around Oliver. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "Don't let him in." Jonathan stood, his demeanor shifting to one of command. "Stay here," he ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Henry, come with me." As they walked toward the gate, Jonathan's mind raced. Who was this man, and what did he want with Lily? The possibility that she was in more trouble than she had let on gnawed at him. But so did the quiet certainty that he wouldn't abandon her now. At the gate, a tall man in a raincoat stood just beyond the bars, his face shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. He looked up as Jonathan approached, his expression unreadable. "May I help you?" Jonathan asked, his tone cold. "I'm here for Lily Harper," the man said, his voice steady. "She has something that doesn't belong to her." Jonathan's jaw tightened. If you're referring to the child, I suggest you leave. Now, the man smirked, a hint of menace in his eyes. You don't know what you're getting into, Mr. Carter. Neither do you, Jonathan retorted, his voice like steel. Leave my property, or I'll have you removed. The man's gaze lingered for a moment before he turned and walked away, his steps deliberate. Jonathan watched until he disappeared from sight, then turned to Henry. Double the security at the gate, he said, and make sure no one gets in without my permission. Yes, sir, Henry replied, already pulling out his phone to make the arrangements. As Jonathan returned to the conservatory, he found Lily pacing, her face pale. It's taken care of, he said firmly, but I need answers, Lily, no more half-truths. Lily nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. I'll tell you everything, she promised, her voice barely audible. Jonathan nodded, though his expression remained grim. Whatever her story was, he knew it would bring complications he wasn't prepared for. Yet, for reasons he couldn't explain, he was ready to face them. The silence in Jonathan's study was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock. Lily sat on the edge of a leather armchair, her fingers fidgeting with the corner of Oliver's blanket. The baby slept soundly in her arms, oblivious to the tension in the room. Across from her, Jonathan sat, his expression guarded but expectant. You said you'd explain, he began, his voice steady but firm. Start from the beginning. Lily took a shaky breath, her gaze fixed on the sleeping child. Oliver isn't my son, she said quietly. He's my brother, my parents. They're gone. It's just been the two of us for the past 6 months. Jonathan's brows furrowed. Gone how? Car accident, she whispered, her voice breaking. They were on their way back from visiting my grandmother. I was supposed to be with them, but I stayed home to study for finals. Jonathan's stern expression softened slightly as he watched the girl's composure unravel. She wiped her eyes quickly, as though embarrassed by her tears. I was left to take care of Oliver, she continued. At first, everything was fine. I had some savings, and I thought I could manage. But then... She hesitated, her voice trailing off. Then what? Jonathan prompted, though his tone had gentled. Lily looked up, her eyes filled with dread. Then someone came forward claiming they had a right to take Oliver, someone I'd never even heard of. They said they were family, but they weren't in my parents' wills. They had no proof, no reason to be in our lives, just threats. Jonathan leaned back, his mind racing. And this man at the gate, he's connected to them. Lily nodded. He's their lawyer. I've been running ever since they showed up. They're powerful, and I don't have the resources to fight them. Why come to me? He asked, his voice sharper than intended. Her gaze didn't waver. Because someone told me you could help. Someone who knew you'd understand what it's like to protect family. Jonathan froze, the words hitting closer than he'd expected. Who told you that? Lily hesitated. A woman named Eleanor Green, she admitted. Jonathan's breath caught. Eleanor was a name from his past, a close friend who had once guided him through one of the darkest periods of his life. They had drifted apart over the years, but he couldn't imagine her sending a stranger to his doorstep without reason. Eleanor, he repeated, his voice low. And how does she know you? Lily shrugged, her expression uncertain. She met me at a shelter after I'd run out of options. She said she knew someone who could help, and she gave me your address. Jonathan's mind churned as he pieced together the fragments of Lily's story. Eleanor had always had a way of seeing through people, of knowing who could be trusted. If she had sent Lily to him, there had to be a reason. And you came here, hoping I'd fix everything, he said, his voice edged with frustration. Lily flinched, but held her ground. I came here hoping you'd at least hear me out, she said. And you did. That's more than anyone else has done. The room fell silent again as Jonathan weighed his options. He didn't trust easily, and the situation was fraught with risks. Yet the determination in Lily's eyes and the vulnerability in her voice stirred something in him, something he hadn't felt in years. "Fine," he said at last. "You can stay. For now." Lily exhaled sharply, relief flooding her face. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "But let me be clear," Jonathan added, his tone firm. "This isn't charity. If I'm going to help you, I need complete honesty. No more secrets, no more half-truths. Understood?" "Yes," Lily said quickly, nodding. "I understand." Jonathan rose from his chair, signaling the end of their conversation. "Henry will make arrangements for you, and I'll be reaching out to Eleanor to confirm your story." Lily nodded again, her gratitude evident despite the lingering tension. As she left the study, Jonathan stood by the window, watching as the sky darkened with the promise of another storm. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with questions and complications he hadn't anticipated. Yet, for reasons he couldn't explain, he felt compelled to follow it. The clock chimed softly behind him, marking the close of another day. Jonathan knew that his ordered life had been irrevocably altered, and though he wasn't ready to admit it, a part of him was beginning to welcome the change. The next morning brought a rare sense of unease to Jonathan's routine. He had spent hours replaying Lily's story in his mind, her connection to Eleanor, and the desperate plea in her voice. As the sunlight filtered into his study, he reached for the phone, dialing a number he hadn't used in years. "Jonathan Carter." Eleanor's voice answered, warm yet edged with surprise. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Eleanor," he began, his voice measured, "I believe you've sent me an unexpected house guest." Her laughter came soft but genuine. "Lily Harper, I presume? How is she?" "Terrified," Jonathan replied bluntly, "and with good reason, from what I've gathered. What exactly have you gotten me into?" Eleanor sighed on the other end. "I knew you wouldn't turn her away. That's why I sent her to you. She needed someone who could protect her, and I couldn't think of anyone better." "Protect her from whom?" Jonathan asked, leaning forward. "She didn't tell you everything." Eleanor's tone was tinged with disappointment. "She told me enough," he said, "but I want to hear it from you." Eleanor hesitated before continuing. "Her parents' deaths weren't an accident, Jonathan. The people after her, after Oliver, are connected to something much darker. Her father had ties to a man who, let's just say, he doesn't take kindly to loose ends. Lily stumbled into something far bigger than she realizes." Jonathan's grip tightened on the phone. "And you thought I was the best candidate to handle this?" "You're not just a businessman, Jonathan," Eleanor said, her voice soft but resolute. "You're a man who understands loss, family, and the weight of responsibility. If anyone can help her navigate this, it's you." He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temple. "I'm not sure I'm the man you remember, Eleanor." "Maybe not," she replied, "but you're still the man she needs." They spoke for a few more minutes, Eleanor offering what little insight she could about Lily's situation. As he hung up, Jonathan felt the weight of her words settle over him. Later that morning, he found Lily in the kitchen, feeding Oliver while Henry prepared a fresh pot of coffee. She glanced up, her expression wary. "I spoke to Eleanor," Jonathan said, taking a seat across from her. Lily's hands stilled, her eyes searching his face. "And?" "She confirmed your story," he replied. "But there's more to it, isn't there?" Lily nodded slowly. "I didn't want to drag you into this. It's dangerous." "That's not your decision to make," Jonathan said firmly. "If I'm going to help you, I need the full picture." She hesitated, then sighed. "My father, he worked for someone powerful. He didn't talk about it much, but after he died, this man started showing up. He claimed my father owed him something, money, information, I don't even know. But when my parents were gone, he turned his attention to me and Oliver. Jonathan frowned, his mind racing. Did your father leave anything behind? Papers, a will, anything that might explain this? Lily shook her head. If he did, I've never seen it. They've been hounding me for months, saying I'm hiding something, but I don't have anything to give them. Jonathan leaned back, his gaze fixed on her. She looked exhausted, but her determination was clear. You're not alone anymore, he said finally. We'll figure this out. Lily blinked, clearly caught off guard by his words. Thank you, she said softly. Jonathan rose, motioning to Henry. I need you to reach out to my legal team and double-check the security measures on the estate. Henry nodded, his expression serious. Right away, sir. As Henry left the room, Jonathan turned back to Lily. Eleanor was right to send you here, he admitted. But this isn't going to be easy. If you stay, you'll need to trust me completely. Can you do that? Lily met his gaze, her eyes shining with gratitude. Yes, she said. I can. Jonathan gave a curt nod, already feeling the weight of what lay ahead. The life he had built, a fortress of order and solitude, was being dismantled piece by piece. Yet, for the first time in years, he felt a spark of purpose reigniting within him. He didn't yet know what the journey would entail, but one thing was certain. He wasn't turning back now. The next morning dawned crisp and bright, the air still carrying the remnants of last night's rain. Jonathan stood in his bedroom, buttoning his cufflinks, his movements mechanical but his thoughts far from routine. The mirror reflected not just his impeccable appearance, but also the deep furrow of concern etched across his face. He descended the grand staircase, the sound of his shoes echoing in the empty hall. In the dining room, breakfast was already laid out, freshly baked croissants, fruit, and a pot of coffee steaming gently. Lily sat at the far end of the table, bouncing Oliver on her knee as the baby babbled happily. Good morning, Jonathan said, taking his seat. Morning, Lily replied softly, her eyes scanning his face as if trying to gauge his mood. The silence stretched between them, broken only by Oliver's giggles and the occasional clink of silverware. Jonathan cleared his throat, setting his cup down with deliberate care. Things are going to change around here, he began, his tone steady. I've instructed Henry to make some adjustments to the security system. No one gets in or out without my explicit approval. Lily's hand froze mid-reach for a piece of toast. Is it that serious? Jonathan met her gaze. Yes. The man at the gate yesterday wasn't bluffing. If they're determined to find you, they won't stop until they do. Her face paled, and she clutched Oliver closer. I'm sorry, she murmured. I didn't mean to bring this trouble to you. Jonathan waved her apology away. We've already crossed that line. What matters now is ensuring your safety, and the boys. Lily nodded, her expression solemn. Thank you. Jonathan hesitated, his gaze softening. I've also arranged for Eleanor to visit tomorrow. She has a clearer picture of what we're dealing with, and she might have some ideas on how to move forward. The mention of Eleanor brought a faint smile to Lily's face. She's special. I wouldn't have made it this far without her. Jonathan didn't reply immediately, his mind momentarily drifting to the memories he shared with Eleanor. Her wisdom and warmth had been a steadying force during some of the most turbulent times in his life. If anyone could help navigate this mess, it was her. As they finished breakfast, the reality of the situation began to sink in. Jonathan realized how much he was stepping outside his carefully curated world. For years, his life had been defined by predictability, a fortress of isolation that kept him safe from the chaos of human connection. Now, that fortress was crumbling. After breakfast, he retreated to his study, only to find that his usual tasks, reviewing contracts, planning investments, felt trivial. His thoughts kept returning to Lily and Oliver, the weight of responsibility pressing heavily on his chest. By mid-afternoon, Eleanor arrived. Her presence was as striking as Jonathan remembered. Silver-streaked hair swept back into an elegant chignon, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the room as she stepped inside. "Jonathan," she said warmly, extending her hand. "It's been too long." He clasped her hand briefly, his lips curving into the faintest of smiles. "Eleanor, I wish it were under better circumstances." Her gaze flicked to Lily, who stood nervously at the edge of the room, Oliver cradled against her chest. "And this must be Lily," Eleanor said, her voice softening. "I've heard so much about you." Lily smiled shyly. "Thank you for everything. I don't know how to repay you." "You don't need to," Eleanor replied firmly. "Helping people like you is its own reward." Jonathan motioned for them to sit, and the three of them settled into a quiet but intense discussion. Eleanor brought a fresh perspective, highlighting potential allies and strategies for countering the threats against Lily and Oliver. As the afternoon wore on, Jonathan found himself marveling at Eleanor's ability to remain composed and insightful, even in the face of such uncertainty. She had a way of turning chaos into order, a skill he had relied on in the past and now felt grateful to witness again. By the time Eleanor left, the first steps of a plan were in motion. Lily seemed more at ease, though the shadows under her eyes betrayed the weight she still carried. Jonathan walked Eleanor to the door, pausing as she turned to face him. "You're doing the right thing, Jonathan," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "I hope so," he replied. Eleanor smiled. "You'll see. Sometimes, stepping out of our comfort zones is exactly what we need, even if we don't realize it at first." As she disappeared into the evening light, Jonathan stood at the threshold of his home, staring out at the quiet street beyond the gates. For the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of something unfamiliar, hope mingled with purpose. The days ahead would be challenging, but he was no longer facing them alone. The next morning brought a crisp clarity to the air, as if the storm that had loomed over the past few days had finally lifted. Jonathan found himself pacing the library, his thoughts a jumble. The conversation with Eleanor had shifted the narrative entirely. This was no longer just about offering temporary refuge. It was a deliberate step into the unknown. The sound of Oliver's giggles pulled him from his reverie. Following the noise, he found Lily in the garden, the morning sunlight casting a golden glow over her as she knelt in the grass with the baby. Oliver was propped up on a blanket, his tiny hands waving excitedly as Lily encouraged him to reach for a colorful toy. For a moment, the scene struck Jonathan as surreal. The lush estate had always been quiet, orderly, almost sterile. Now, it felt alive, brimming with sounds and sights he hadn't realized he'd missed. "Good morning," he called, stepping onto the gravel path. Lily turned, shielding her eyes from the sun. "Good morning," she replied with a hesitant smile. Jonathan approached, glancing down at Oliver, who stared up at him with wide, curious eyes. "He seems happy today," Jonathan noted. Lily nodded. "He loves being outside. I think it reminds him of before." Her voice faltered slightly, and Jonathan saw the flicker of pain she tried to suppress. He sat on the edge of a nearby bench, watching as Oliver reached for the toy again. "I've been thinking," Jonathan began, his tone measured, "about what Eleanor said yesterday, about stepping forward, not just reacting." Lily looked at him, her expression cautious. "What does that mean for us?" "It means we need to stop waiting for the next threat to find us," Jonathan said. "We need to be proactive, Figure out who these people are and why they're so interested in Oliver. Lily's brow furrowed. How? I don't have anything. No papers, no answers, just questions. Jonathan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I've hired a private investigator. He's discreet, thorough, and trustworthy. If there's anything to uncover about your father's dealings or the people after you, he'll find it. Lily's eyes widened. You're doing all this for us? Jonathan hesitated before answering. I've spent most of my life avoiding complications, he admitted. But this feels like something I can't turn away from. Lily didn't reply immediately. Instead, she looked down at Oliver, brushing her fingers gently across his cheek. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but firm. Thank you for believing in us. Jonathan nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling that his involvement was about more than belief. It was about redemption, a chance to right the wrongs he'd ignored for too long. By mid-afternoon, the investigator, a sharp-eyed man named Marcus Lane, arrived at the estate. He carried a slim briefcase and an air of quiet confidence that immediately set Jonathan at ease. Mr. Carter, Marcus greeted, shaking his hand firmly. Eleanor gave me a brief overview of the situation. I'll need to speak with Miss Harper directly to get a clearer picture. Jonathan led him to the sitting room, where Lily waited with Oliver in her arms. Marcus introduced himself, his demeanor professional yet warm enough to put her at ease. Over the next hour, Lily recounted everything she could remember: her parents' sudden deaths, the strange men who had shown up at their home, the relentless pursuit that had driven her to run. Marcus listened intently, taking notes on a small pad. When she finished, he asked a series of probing questions, his tone careful but insistent. Your father, Marcus said, did he ever talk about his work, mention any names or places? Not really, Lily admitted. He was quiet about it. But I do remember one thing. He had a locked cabinet in his office. He told me and my mom never to touch it. Marcus's pen paused. Do you know what was inside? Lily shook her head. No. After he died, the cabinet disappeared. I assumed the people who came after us had taken it. Marcus jotted something down. That could be important. If they took it, they might still be looking for whatever was inside. The conversation continued for a while longer, Marcus piecing together fragments of Lily's story with the precision of a puzzle solver. By the time he left, Jonathan felt a cautious optimism that progress was being made. That evening, as the estate settled into its usual quiet, Jonathan stood by the window of his study, staring out at the moonlit garden. Lily and Oliver were a world apart from the life he had built, yet they were now firmly entwined in it. He couldn't help but wonder what the investigation would uncover, and whether he was truly prepared for the answers. The night stretched before him, filled with uncertainties. But for the first time in years, Jonathan didn't feel alone. The estate seemed to hum with a new energy, as if responding to the quiet upheaval brought by Lily and Oliver. For Jonathan, the changes were palpable. His home, once a bastion of solitude and precision, now bore the marks of an unfamiliar rhythm, the soft sounds of a baby cooing, Lily's quiet footsteps as she moved through the halls, and, more subtly, his own shifting perspective. On this particular morning, Jonathan found himself in the kitchen, a room he rarely entered unless necessary. The staff had been given the day off, and Lily was fussing over a kettle, attempting to brew tea while balancing Oliver on one hip. "Do you need help?" Jonathan asked, his voice startling her. She turned, her expression a mix of surprise and amusement. "I didn't think you knew your way around a kitchen." "I don't," he admitted, stepping closer. "But I can hold Oliver while you finish that. He's less likely to burn himself with me, I assume." Lily laughed softly and handed the baby over. Oliver squirmed briefly before settling in Jonathan's arms, his tiny fingers gripping the lapel of Jonathan's jacket. "You've gotten good at that," Lily remarked, pouring the tea. Jonathan glanced down at the baby, who was staring up at him with wide, curious eyes. "I've had some practice," he said dryly. Lily placed 2 cups on the table, gesturing for Jonathan to sit. As he settled into the chair, Oliver still in his arms, he felt a flicker of something he couldn't quite name, a sense of belonging, perhaps, or the faint stirrings of purpose. Later that day, Marcus returned with an update. Jonathan met him in the study, eager for answers. "I've managed to track down some of your father's former colleagues," Marcus told Lily, who sat across from him, her hands tightly clasped. "It seems he worked for a private contracting firm that specialized in logistics and security. On the surface, it was legitimate. But I suspect there were less than legal dealings beneath the surface." Lily's brow furrowed. "What does that mean?" "It means your father might have been involved in something valuable or dangerous," Marcus explained. "That cabinet you mentioned could have contained documents, blueprints, or even financial records that someone wants." Jonathan leaned forward. "Any leads on who these people might be?" Marcus nodded. "There's a name that keeps coming up, Conrad Steele. He's known for running a shadowy network that operates on the edges of legality. If Steele's involved, it explains the persistence and the resources of the people pursuing you." The room fell silent as the weight of Marcus's words settled over them. Jonathan could see the fear in Lily's eyes, though she tried to mask it. "What do we do now?" Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We stay ahead of them," Marcus said firmly. "I'll dig deeper into Steele's connections and figure out what they're after. In the meantime, you need to be vigilant. Don't go anywhere without letting someone know, and keep security tight." Jonathan nodded. "You'll have whatever resources you need. Just keep me informed." That evening, Jonathan found Lily in the library, staring at a row of books but not really seeing them. Oliver slept in a bassinet nearby, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. "You should rest," Jonathan said, stepping into the room. Lily turned, her face pale. "I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see them. I keep wondering what they'll do if they find us." Jonathan crossed the room, his steps deliberate. "They won't. Not here." Lily's gaze met his, and for the first time, he saw the full extent of her exhaustion. The months of running, the constant fear, the weight of responsibility far too heavy for someone so young. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. Jonathan hesitated, then placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You don't need to," he replied. "You just need to trust me. We'll figure this out." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. Instead, she nodded, a faint smile breaking through her fatigue. As Jonathan returned to his study later that night, he found himself reflecting on the changes unfolding around him. For years, he had avoided entanglements, preferring the simplicity of solitude. But now, with Lily and Oliver under his roof, he felt something he hadn't in decades: responsibility. Not for profits or projects, but for people. It was both unsettling and oddly fulfilling. Jonathan poured himself a drink, the amber liquid glinting in the soft glow of his desk lamp. The journey ahead was uncertain, filled with risks and unknowns, yet, for the first time in years, he felt ready to face it. The following morning was bright but crisp, the kind of day that made the air feel alive. Jonathan sat in his conservatory, the sunlight streaming through the glass walls, casting patterns on the tiled floor. He was joined by Marcus, who had brought further updates on his investigation, and Eleanor, who had arrived earlier that morning. Across from them, Lily sat nervously, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Here's what we know, Marcus began, setting a slim folder on the table. Conrad Steele runs a highly secretive network that dabbles in everything from arms trading to corporate espionage. He's been careful to stay off the radar, but his name comes up frequently in association with individuals who disappear. Lily flinched at the word, but Marcus continued. Your father, Lily, may have worked on a project for Steele's network. Whatever he knew or had, it's significant enough for Steele to send people after you. Jonathan's jaw tightened. And what do we do with that information? Marcus glanced at him. I'm working on finding Steele's vulnerabilities, but that takes time. For now, we need to keep Lily and Oliver hidden. The security measures you've implemented are solid, but if Steele wants in badly enough, he'll find a way. Eleanor leaned forward, her tone calm but resolute. This isn't just about defense, Jonathan. You need allies, people who can help you fight back. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. And where do we find these allies? Eleanor smiled faintly. You already have one sitting across from you. She gestured toward Marcus. And I can reach out to a few old contacts of my own. Jonathan studied her for a moment, then nodded. Do what you need to. Just make sure it doesn't bring more attention to this house. I'm discreet, Eleanor replied with a wink. Lily, who had been silent, finally spoke. What if they never stop? What if this is our life now? Jonathan turned to her, his expression softening. That's not going to happen, he said firmly. We'll figure this out, and you'll have a life. A real one. Lily nodded, though her eyes still brimmed with uncertainty. That afternoon, Jonathan took Marcus on a tour of the estate to assess the security measures. They walked the perimeter, discussing potential vulnerabilities and plans to reinforce weak points. You've got a solid setup, Marcus remarked as they neared the gates, but I'd suggest adding a few motion sensors in the blind spots and maybe upgrading the cameras to thermal imaging. Do it, Jonathan said without hesitation. As they returned to the main house, Jonathan paused near the garden, where Lily sat on a bench, cradling Oliver. She looked up as they approached, her expression wary but curious. How's the little one? Marcus asked, his tone surprisingly gentle. Lily smiled faintly. Better. He's been sleeping more since we got here. That's a good sign, Marcus said, giving her a reassuring nod. Jonathan watched the interaction, noting the way Lily seemed to relax slightly in Marcus's presence. It was a small shift, but it mattered. Later, as the day wound down, Eleanor joined Jonathan in his study. She poured herself a glass of wine from the decanter on his desk, her movements as natural as if she owned the place. You're handling this well, she said, taking a sip. Jonathan snorted. Am I? Most days, it feels like I'm making it up as I go. That's because you are, she replied with a chuckle, but you're doing better than you think. Lily trusts you, and so does Marcus. That's not something to take lightly. Jonathan sighed, running a hand through his hair. I've spent most of my life avoiding things like this. People, emotions, entanglements, and now you're in the thick of it, Eleanor finished, her tone gentle. But maybe that's exactly where you need to be. Jonathan didn't reply, but her words lingered as the evening stretched on. By the time the house had settled into quiet, Jonathan stood on the balcony outside his bedroom, gazing at the moonlit grounds. Below, he could see the faint glow of the security lights along the perimeter, a reminder of the danger that still loomed. Yet, for all the uncertainty, there was a sense of resolve building within him. He wasn't just protecting Lily and Oliver, he was building something he hadn't realized he needed: connections, purpose, and perhaps even redemption. As the cool night air wrapped around him, Jonathan felt a flicker of determination. The road ahead would be treacherous, but he was no longer afraid to walk it. The evening began uneventfully, the calm routine of the house giving Lily a rare moment of peace. She sat in the living room with Oliver nestled in her lap, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. Jonathan was in his study, and Henry moved silently through the halls, ensuring everything was in order. But as the clock struck 9, the intercom at the gate buzzed sharply, breaking the quiet. Henry, ever alert, moved quickly to answer it. Jonathan appeared in the hallway, his brow furrowed. "Who is it?" Jonathan asked. Henry glanced at the monitor, his face tightening. "The man from before, he's back and he's not alone." Jonathan joined him at the screen, where 3 men stood at the gate. The one in front wore a tailored suit, his expression calm, but with a hint of menace. Behind him, 2 others stood, their broad frames and stiff postures suggesting they were more than mere associates. "I'll handle this," Jonathan said, his voice firm. "Keep an eye on the cameras. If anything seems off, alert the security team immediately." Henry nodded, as Jonathan grabbed his coat and strode out to the gate. The gravel crunched under his shoes as he approached, the cool night air biting at his skin. The man in the suit stepped forward as Jonathan stopped a few feet from the gate. "Mr. Carter," the man said, his voice smooth. "It seems we need to have another conversation. You seem to misunderstand the meaning of private property," Jonathan replied, his tone icy. "You're trespassing." The man smiled thinly. "I prefer to think of it as persistence. You see, there's something, or rather someone, here who belongs elsewhere." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "If you're referring to Miss Harper and her brother, they're under my protection. And I suggest you rethink whatever plan brought you here tonight." The man chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. "Protection, a noble sentiment, but misplaced. Miss Harper is withholding something very valuable, and my employer doesn't take kindly to such behavior." Jonathan took a step closer to the gate, his eyes narrowing. "Your employer can take it up with the courts. Until then, I suggest you leave before this situation escalates." The man's smile faded. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Carter. This isn't a fight you want to pick. And yet here I am," Jonathan said, his voice hard. "Now, I'll ask you one last time to leave." For a moment, neither man moved. Then, the suited man gestured to his associates, and the 3 of them turned and walked away, their retreat deliberate but tense. As they disappeared into the shadows, Jonathan exhaled, the tension in his shoulders remaining even as the immediate threat receded. Back inside, Lily waited anxiously in the hallway, her arms wrapped protectively around Oliver. She looked up as Jonathan entered, her eyes wide with fear. "What did they want?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "To intimidate," Jonathan replied, shrugging off his coat, "and to test my resolve. They'll be back, but not tonight." Lily's grip on Oliver tightened. "I'm sorry," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "I never meant to bring this to your doorstep." Jonathan stepped closer, his expression softening. "You didn't bring this here, Lily. They did, and I'm not about to let them win." Her gaze searched his face, and she nodded, though her fear lingered. Later, in his study, Jonathan sat with a tumbler of scotch, the firelight casting flickering shadows on the walls. Marcus had called to confirm that the men at the gate were likely Steele's operatives, and that their next move would be more aggressive. "You'll need to be ready," Marcus had said. "They don't give up easily." Jonathan stared into the amber liquid, his thoughts racing. He wasn't a man who sought conflict, but the fire inside him now burned brighter than his fear. He had spent too many years avoiding entanglements, too many years building walls to keep the world out. Now, with Lily and Oliver depending on him, those walls no longer mattered. The battle had begun, and Jonathan Carter was determined to win. The morning after the confrontation at the gate was unusually still, as though the estate itself was bracing for what lay ahead. Jonathan woke earlier than usual, the weight of the previous night pressing heavily on him. He dressed quickly and found himself pacing the library, mentally running through scenarios, contingencies, and what Marcus had said about Steele's persistence. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock. Lily peeked into the room. Oliver balanced on her hip. She looked pale, but determined. "Am I interrupting?" she asked hesitantly. Jonathan waved her in. "No, come in." She stepped inside, sitting in one of the armchairs near the fireplace. Oliver squirmed in her lap, grabbing at a toy she had tucked in her pocket. "I wanted to thank you," she began, her voice steady despite her evident exhaustion. "For standing up to them. I know this isn't your fight, but—" "It is now," Jonathan interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. "They crossed a line when they came here. And as long as you're under my roof, I won't let them hurt you." Lily's eyes glistened, and she nodded, her grip on Oliver tightening. Later that morning, Marcus arrived with an air of urgency. He brought updates, and the news wasn't good. "Steele's men aren't just after Lily," Marcus explained, spreading a series of photographs and documents across Jonathan's desk. "They've been watching your estate, tracking your movements. This isn't intimidation anymore, it's strategy." Jonathan's jaw clenched as he studied the photos. Grainy images of his car entering and leaving the estate, shadowy figures lingering near the gates. "What do they want?" Jonathan asked, though he already knew the answer. "They want what they think Lily has," Marcus replied, "and they'll escalate until they get it." Lily, who stood near the window with Oliver, turned abruptly. "But I don't have anything." "How do I convince them of that?" "You can't," Marcus said bluntly. "Steele isn't interested in the truth. He's interested in control. The only way to stop this is to turn the tables, make him the one on the defensive." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. "And how do we do that?" Marcus hesitated, then slid a document across the desk. "Steele's network thrives on secrecy, but there's one weak link. A former associate who turned informant a few years back. If we can reach him, he might have the leverage we need to keep Steele at bay." "And this associate," Jonathan asked, scanning the name on the document, "can he be trusted?" "As much as anyone in Steele's orbit," Marcus replied, "but he won't talk unless he knows he's safe. We'll need to get to him before Steele's people do." Jonathan nodded, already forming a plan. "Let's make it happen." The rest of the day was a flurry of preparation. Marcus coordinated with his contacts, arranging a secure meeting with the informant, while Jonathan focused on fortifying the estate. Security cameras were upgraded, motion sensors installed, and a private security team was discreetly deployed to patrol the grounds. Lily, though overwhelmed, insisted on helping. She worked alongside Henry to organize supplies for Oliver, ensuring they could move quickly if needed. Despite her fear, she carried herself with quiet determination, her focus entirely on protecting her brother. "You're handling this well," Jonathan said as they crossed paths in the hall. Lily gave him a faint smile. "I don't feel like I am, but I don't have a choice." "None of us do," Jonathan replied. By evening, the preparations were complete. Jonathan stood on the balcony outside his study, gazing at the estate below. The glow of the security lights cast long shadows across the garden, but the darkness beyond the gates felt oppressive, like an unspoken threat waiting to strike. Eleanor joined him, her presence as steadying as ever. "You've done everything you can," she said quietly. "It doesn't feel like enough," Jonathan admitted. Eleanor placed a hand on his arm. "You're stepping up in a way most people wouldn't. That matters." Jonathan didn't reply, but her words settled over him like a balm. That night, as the household settled into uneasy silence, Jonathan found himself standing over Oliver's crib. The baby slept peacefully, his small chest rising and falling with each breath. Lily sat nearby, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, but unwilling to leave her brother's side. Jonathan reached down, gently adjusting the blanket over Oliver. "He's lucky to have you," he said softly. Lily looked up, surprised. "I think it's the other way around." Jonathan met her gaze, and for a moment the weight of the situation seemed to lift. There was still so much uncertainty, so much danger ahead, but for now they were together, and that was enough. The challenges were growing, the stakes higher than ever. Yet as Jonathan left the room, he felt a flicker of resolve stronger than before. He wasn't just fighting for Lily and Oliver anymore. He was fighting for the man he wanted to become. The quiet of the estate the next morning felt deceptive, as though the tension brewing beneath its surface had found a way to manifest in the stillness. Jonathan sat alone in his study, staring at a faded photograph resting on his desk. It was an image of him and his younger brother, William, taken decades earlier during a family trip to the coast. The picture had been buried in a drawer for years, but now, with everything happening, it felt as though the past was demanding to be acknowledged. William had been the dreamer, the one who believed in people even when there was no reason to. Jonathan had dismissed him as naive, too willing to trust in a world Jonathan saw as ruthless and transactional. But now, as he thought of Lily and Oliver, he couldn't help but wonder if William had been right all along. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. He quickly slid the photograph into the drawer as Eleanor entered, her expression both concerned and curious. "You look like a man carrying the weight of the world," she said, taking a seat across from him. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, exhaling heavily. "Maybe I am." Eleanor studied him for a moment. "It's about more than Lily and Oliver, isn't it?" Jonathan didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "I've spent years building walls around myself, Eleanor, keeping people out. It was easier that way. No complications, no pain. And now, he said, his gaze distant, those walls are crumbling, and I don't know if I'm ready for what's on the other side." Eleanor reached across the desk, her hand resting lightly on his. I've known you a long time, Jonathan, and I've seen you face harder truths than this. You may have built those walls, but you've always cared. You just forgot how to show it." Her words struck a chord, though Jonathan wasn't ready to admit it. Later that day, Lily found him in the garden, sitting on a stone bench under the shade of an old oak tree. Oliver was asleep in her arms, his tiny face serene. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. Jonathan gestured for her to sit. For a while, they sat in companionable silence, the rustle of leaves and distant chirping of birds the only sounds. "I used to think I had everything figured out," Lily said suddenly, her voice soft, "that if I just worked hard enough, stayed strong enough, I could handle anything." Jonathan glanced at her, sensing the vulnerability in her words. "But after my parents died," she continued, "I realized how fragile it all was. How quickly everything can fall apart." He nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Life has a way of reminding us how little control we really have." Lily turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "Do you ever wonder if it's worth it? Trying to hold everything together, even when it feels impossible?" Jonathan hesitated before answering. "Every day. But I've also learned that the hardest fights are often the ones that matter most." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "I guess we're both learning how to fight then." That evening, Jonathan retreated to his study, the weight of his conversation with Lily lingering in his mind. He poured himself a drink, the amber liquid catching the light as he swirled it in his glass. The photograph of William still lay in the drawer, calling to him. With a sigh, he pulled it out, studying the smiling faces frozen in time. "I failed you," he murmured, the words barely audible. "I thought I was protecting myself, but all I did was push everyone away." The sharp buzz of his phone broke the moment. It was Marcus. "We have a problem," Marcus said without preamble. Jonathan straightened, his grip tightening on the glass. "What is it?" "I've received intel that Steele's men are moving." They're planning something, and it's big. We don't have much time to prepare. Jonathan's jaw clenched. Do we know what they're after? Not yet, Marcus replied. But whatever it is, it's enough for them to take risks. Let me know the moment you have more details, Jonathan said, ending the call. As he set the phone down, the flicker of determination from the previous day reignited. Steele might have the upper hand for now, but Jonathan wasn't the man he used to be, the one who hid behind his wealth and walls. He was ready to fight, not just for Lily and Oliver, but for himself, for the man he wanted to become. The house was unusually quiet that evening, as if it, too, sensed the impending storm. Jonathan stood by the window of his study, watching the distant lights of the security patrols sweep across the estate's vast grounds. The phone call from Marcus earlier had left him restless, his mind spinning with questions and strategies. What would Steele's next move be? And would they be ready when it came? A faint knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. He turned to find Lily standing hesitantly in the doorway, Oliver asleep in her arms. "Is this a bad time?" she asked softly. Jonathan shook his head, gesturing for her to come in. She crossed the room, sitting in the chair across from his desk. The firelight cast a warm glow on her face, but the shadows under her eyes betrayed her exhaustion. "I thought you should know," she began, her voice steady but strained. "Marcus called me earlier. He thinks Steele might try to force us out, make it impossible for us to stay here." Jonathan frowned, leaning forward. "Did he say how?" "He wasn't sure," Lily admitted. "But he mentioned legal action, public pressure, anything to weaken our position." Jonathan exhaled sharply. Steele was playing a calculated game, attacking not with brute force but with precision, and it was working. "We'll handle it," he said, his tone firm. "Whatever Steele throws at us, we'll find a way to counter it." Lily nodded, though her expression remained uncertain. "I don't know how you stay so calm," she said quietly. "I feel like I'm barely holding it together." Jonathan's gaze softened. "I'm not as calm as I look," he admitted, "but I've learned that panic doesn't solve anything. You take the next step, and then the one after that. That's all you can do." Lily smiled faintly, her grip on Oliver tightening. "Thank you for everything." Jonathan nodded, watching as she stood and left the room. Her words lingered long after she was gone, a reminder of the fragile trust that had formed between them. The next day began like any other, the household settling into its routine despite the tension that loomed over them. But by mid-afternoon, the peace was shattered. It started with an alert from the security system. Jonathan and Marcus were in the library, reviewing documents, when Henry appeared, his face pale. "Sir," he said urgently, "there's been a breach." Jonathan rose immediately. "What kind of breach?" "A drone," Henry replied. "It was spotted over the eastern perimeter. It's gone now, but it was recording." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Get the footage," he ordered. Minutes later, they were gathered in the security room, watching the grainy footage. The drone had hovered low over the estate, its camera sweeping across the grounds before retreating beyond the gate. "They're scouting," Marcus said grimly, "looking for weaknesses." Jonathan's mind raced. "Can we track it? Find out where it came from?" "I'll see what I can do," Marcus replied, "but drones like this are hard to trace. Whoever sent it knows what they're doing." Jonathan turned to Henry. "Double the patrols. I want every inch of this property monitored." "Yes, sir," Henry said, already moving to relay the orders. That evening, as the household settled into an uneasy quiet, Marcus pulled Jonathan aside. "We need to talk," Marcus said, his tone low. Jonathan nodded, following him into the study. "Steele's escalating," Marcus began. "The drone was just the beginning. My sources tell me he's planning something bigger, something that could force your hand." "What does he want?" Jonathan asked, though he already knew the answer. "Lily," Marcus said simply. "And whatever he thinks she has." Jonathan's fists clenched. "He's not getting her." Marcus nodded. "I know, but we need to be ready for anything. Steele's men are dangerous, and they don't play by the rules." Jonathan exhaled slowly, the weight of the situation pressing heavily on him. "Do whatever you need to do," he said finally. "Just keep them out." The night passed in tense silence, the estate blanketed in darkness, but even as the hours dragged on, sleep eluded Jonathan. He found himself pacing the halls, his mind churning with plans and contingencies. In the nursery, he paused to check on Oliver. The baby slept soundly, his small chest rising and falling with each breath. Nearby, Lily dozed fitfully in a chair, her face etched with worry even in sleep. Jonathan stood in the doorway watching them. He felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. Protectiveness, perhaps, or a deeper sense of purpose than he'd felt in years. Whatever Steele's next move was, Jonathan knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't let anything happen to Lily or Oliver. Not while they were under his roof. By dawn, the estate was stirring again, the quiet hum of activity resuming as the household prepared for another day. But beneath the surface, the tension remained, an unspoken reminder that the battle was far from over. Jonathan stood by the window of his study, watching as the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon. The challenges ahead felt insurmountable, but for the first time in years, he felt ready to face them. Because this wasn't just about protecting his home or his reputation, it was about protecting the fragile, fleeting hope that had taken root in his heart. The day began with a sense of urgency, the kind that clung to the air and spurred everyone into action. Jonathan stood at the head of the dining table, scanning the estate's updated security plan that Marcus had finalized late the previous night. Each detail had been carefully considered, from additional surveillance cameras to emergency protocols that left no room for error. "We've closed every gap," Marcus assured him, pointing to the map of the estate laid out before them. "But Steele's men are resourceful. If they can't get in, they'll try to draw us out." Jonathan nodded, his expression grim. "Then we stay ahead of them." Across the room, Lily hovered near the fireplace, cradling Oliver in her arms. Though she tried to appear calm, the tension in her shoulders betrayed her unease. "Lily," Jonathan said, his tone softer as he turned to her, "you and Oliver will stay in the safe room if anything happens. No exceptions." She hesitated, then nodded. "I understand." Jonathan met her gaze, and for a brief moment he saw the trust she had come to place in him, a trust he was determined not to betray. By mid-afternoon, Marcus received a call that confirmed their suspicions. Steele's men had been spotted near the outskirts of the property, their movements deliberate but inconspicuous enough to avoid drawing attention from local authorities. "They're testing us," Marcus said, hanging up the phone, "seeing how far they can push before we respond." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Then let's give them a response." He called the security team together, issuing clear instructions. Patrols were doubled, and key areas of the estate were reinforced. Marcus coordinated with his contacts to monitor Steele's communications, hoping to intercept any plans before they could be executed. As evening fell, the tension in the house reached a breaking point. Jonathan stood in his study, gazing out at the shadowed grounds below. The security lights cast long, flickering beams across the garden, but beyond the gates, the darkness felt impenetrable. Eleanor entered the room quietly, her presence as steadying as ever. "You've done everything you can," she said, her voice calm. "It doesn't feel like enough," Jonathan admitted, turning to face her. Eleanor placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "You're not just protecting a house, Jonathan. You're protecting people. And you're doing it well." He nodded, though the weight of responsibility remained heavy on his shoulders. The first sign of trouble came just after midnight. A sharp alert from the security system sent a ripple of activity through the estate. Jonathan and Marcus were in the security room within moments, scanning the monitors. "There," Marcus said, pointing to a figure moving near the eastern perimeter. "They're trying to breach the fence." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "How many?" "Looks like 3, maybe 4, Marcus replied, "but there could be more waiting in the wings." Jonathan nodded. "Alert the team! No one gets through." The security team moved swiftly, intercepting the intruders before they could advance further. A brief but intense confrontation followed, the sound of shouts and scuffling echoing across the estate. Within minutes, the intruders were subdued, and Marcus confirmed that the situation was under control. Jonathan exhaled slowly, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins, but the victory felt hollow. "This was just a test," Marcus said quietly. "Steele's real move is still coming." The following morning, the aftermath of the breach was evident. Though the estate remained intact, the sense of invulnerability Jonathan had cultivated over the years had been irrevocably shaken. Lily found him in the library, staring at a map of the property spread across the table. Oliver was in her arms, his small hand gripping her shirt as she approached. "Are we safe?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jonathan looked up, meeting her gaze. "Yes," he said firmly. "Last night was a warning, but we're stronger for it. Steele won't catch us off guard again." Her eyes filled with tears, but she quickly blinked them away. "Thank you," she said softly. Jonathan stood, crossing the room to place a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "This is your home now, and I'll protect it no matter what." Lily nodded, a faint smile breaking through her fear. Later that day, Marcus returned with promising news. The informant they had been trying to reach had agreed to a meeting. It was a small but significant step toward gaining the upper hand against Steele. Jonathan felt a flicker of hope as he reviewed the details. For the first time since this ordeal began, there was a sense of forward momentum, a hard-won victory, however small. That evening, as the household settled into a tentative calm, Jonathan found himself in the nursery. Oliver was asleep in his crib, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. Lily sat nearby, her head resting against the back of a chair, her expression peaceful but tired. Jonathan stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching them. For all the chaos and danger that surrounded them, this room felt like an oasis, a reminder of what they were fighting for. As he turned to leave, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was still fraught with uncertainty, but he was no longer facing it alone. And for the first time in years, he felt ready to confront whatever challenges lay ahead. The air on the estate seemed to crackle with unspoken tension the next morning. Despite the calm that followed the breach, everyone knew it was a temporary reprieve. Jonathan stood by the window in the study, watching the security team patrol the grounds with measured precision. Beyond the gates, the world felt like a waiting predator, ready to pounce. The knock on the study door came softly, but Jonathan didn't need to turn to know it was Lily. She entered with Oliver in her arms, the baby alert and gripping her sweater with his tiny fists. "Marcus said the informant agreed to meet," she began, her voice steady despite the weariness in her eyes. Jonathan nodded, gesturing for her to sit. "It's progress," he replied, though his tone carried a cautious edge. "But it's also a risk. Steele won't let us move easily." Lily's lips pressed into a thin line. "What happens if this doesn't work? If they still come for us?" Jonathan leaned forward, resting his hands on the desk. "Then we keep fighting. Steele may have resources, but so do we, and we're not alone in this." Her expression softened at his words. "I don't know how you can stay so composed." "I'm not," Jonathan admitted. "But I've learned that fear doesn't help. We take it one step at a time." Lily nodded, cradling Oliver closer. "Thank you," she said quietly, her gaze meeting his. Jonathan didn't respond verbally, but his slight nod conveyed a world of unspoken promises. By midday, Marcus had finalized the details for the meeting with the informant. It would take place at a remote location, a small diner just off a quiet highway. The informant, a man named Dominic Wren, had a reputation for walking the line between survival and betrayal. Jonathan trusted Marcus's judgment, but the thought of relying on a man like Wren unsettled him. "Are you sure he'll show?" Jonathan asked as he and Marcus reviewed the plan in the security room. "He'll show," Marcus replied. "He knows what's at stake. Steele's men will come after him next if he doesn't cooperate." Jonathan nodded, though unease lingered. "We'll need eyes on the area before and during the meeting. I want to know the moment anything looks suspicious." Marcus smirked faintly. "Already done. You've trained me well, Mr. Carter." That afternoon, Eleanor arrived at the estate, bringing her steady presence and a fresh perspective. Jonathan filled her in on the plans, and she listened carefully, her sharp mind assessing every detail. "It's a good plan," she said finally, "but be ready for contingencies. Wren isn't exactly known for his loyalty." "I'm aware," Jonathan replied, "but he's our best chance at finding leverage against Steele." Eleanor nodded, her expression thoughtful. "And Lily, how's she holding up?" "She's stronger than she realizes," Jonathan said. "But this isn't easy for her or Oliver." Eleanor smiled faintly. "It's not easy for any of you, but you're doing the right thing, Jonathan." Her words, as always, carried a grounding reassurance. The evening before the meeting, Jonathan gathered the household in the sitting room. Lily sat with Oliver on her lap, Eleanor beside her. Marcus stood near the fireplace, a silent sentinel. "I need everyone to be prepared," Jonathan began, his tone firm. "Tomorrow's meeting is a critical step, but it's also dangerous. Steele's men will be watching, and they won't hesitate to interfere if they sense an opportunity." Lily nodded, her expression resolute despite the fear that lingered in her eyes. "If anything goes wrong," Jonathan continued, "I want you and Oliver in the safe room immediately. No exceptions." Lily hesitated, then nodded again. Eleanor spoke next, her voice calm but authoritative. "We've taken every precaution. Trust in that and trust in each other." The room fell silent, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on everyone. That night, as the household settled into uneasy quiet, Jonathan found himself once again in the nursery. Oliver slept soundly in his crib, his small body curled into a peaceful ball. Lily sat nearby, her head bowed as she whispered a soft lullaby. Jonathan watched from the doorway, his chest tightening with an emotion he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just about protecting a child or a young woman, it was about protecting the fragile hope they represented. Stepping inside, he adjusted the blanket over Oliver, then turned to Lily. "We'll get through this," he said softly. She looked up, her eyes glistening. "I want to believe that." "You don't have to," Jonathan replied. "I'll believe it for both of us." The dawn of the next day brought a sense of inevitability. The meeting with Wren was the next step in a path they couldn't avoid, and Jonathan was determined to see it through. As the car pulled away from the estate, carrying Marcus and 2 security team members, Jonathan stood by the gates, watching until they disappeared from sight. The road ahead was dangerous, but he knew one thing for certain: they were no longer running. They were fighting. The diner sat off a desolate stretch of highway, its faded neon sign flickering weakly against the twilight sky. Marcus and the security team arrived first, scanning the area for anything out of place. Dominic Wren was already inside, seated in a booth near the back, his posture casual but his eyes sharp, darting to every movement outside the windows. Jonathan arrived shortly after, stepping out of the car with deliberate calm. The weight of the confrontation pressed heavily on his shoulders, but his stride was firm as he entered the diner. Marcus met him at the door, giving a subtle nod to indicate that everything was as secure as it could be. "Mr. Carter," Wren said as Jonathan approached, his tone smooth but tinged with wariness. He gestured to the booth across from him. "Please sit." Jonathan slid into the seat, his expression unreadable. Wren was a wiry man in his late 40s, with sharp features and an air of nervous energy. His fingers drummed lightly on the table as he leaned forward. "You've come a long way for this meeting," Wren said, his lips curling into a faint smile. "I hope I'm worth it." "That depends on what you have to offer," Jonathan replied evenly. "You claim to know Steele's plans. Let's hear them." Wren's smile faltered slightly, but he maintained his composure. "Steele isn't just after Lily Harper or her brother," he began. "He's after what her father left behind. A ledger containing detailed accounts of Steele's operations, names, transactions, locations. It's the kind of thing that could bring his entire empire crashing down." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "And he thinks Lily has it." Wren nodded. "Her father was smart. He hid the ledger somewhere safe. But Steele believes she knows where. That's why he's not stopping until he gets to her." "Does she know where it is?" Jonathan asked, his voice steady. "No," Wren admitted. "But Steele doesn't believe that. And if he gets desperate enough, he'll come for her, no matter how well you've hidden her." Jonathan leaned back, his mind racing. "Why are you telling me this? What do you gain by betraying Steele?" Wren's eyes flicked nervously toward the window before returning to Jonathan. "Let's just say my loyalty to Steele isn't what it used to be. I've seen what happens to people who cross him or fail him, and I have no intention of being next." "Then help us," Jonathan said firmly. "Give us what we need to stop him." Wren hesitated, his fingers drumming faster on the table. "I can give you a location. Steele has a private storage facility where he keeps his most sensitive materials. If the ledger is anywhere, it's there. But getting to it won't be easy." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "We'll worry about that. Just give us the information." Wren scribbled an address on a napkin and slid it across the table. "That's all I've got. Once you have the ledger, Steele loses his leverage." Jonathan pocketed the napkin, his expression unreadable. "And you? What happens to you after this?" Wren smirked, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Let's just say I'll be taking an extended vacation. Somewhere Steele can't find me." Before Jonathan could respond, Marcus's voice crackled over the radio in his ear. "We've got company. 3 vehicles approaching fast." Jonathan stood abruptly, his gaze locking onto Wren. "Stay here. Don't move until we're clear." Outside, Marcus and the security team were already in motion, taking up defensive positions near the diner's entrance. The approaching vehicles came to a screeching halt, and armed men spilled out, their movements coordinated and aggressive. "They're Steele's men," Marcus confirmed, his tone grim. "Looks like they didn't trust Wren to stay quiet." Jonathan stepped outside, his eyes scanning the chaos. Steele's men were advancing, their weapons raised. Marcus and his team opened fire, their aim precise but controlled, focused on keeping the attackers at bay. "Get to the car," Marcus shouted to Jonathan. "We'll cover you." Jonathan hesitated for a fraction of a second, his instincts warring between retreating and standing his ground. But the sight of Marcus and his team holding the line pushed him into action. He sprinted toward the car, ducking as bullets ricocheted off nearby surfaces. Once inside the vehicle, Jonathan grabbed the radio. "Fall back!" "Regroup at the estate." Marcus and the team retreated in an organized manner, their movements efficient despite the chaos. The attackers hesitated, caught off guard by the sudden withdrawal, but they didn't pursue. Back at the estate, The tension was palpable as Jonathan and Marcus regrouped in the study. Wren had escaped during the chaos, but the address he provided was now their most valuable asset. "Did you get what we needed?" Lily asked, her voice trembling as she stood in the doorway with Eleanor. Jonathan nodded, his expression resolute. "We have a lead. It's risky, but it's the best shot we've got." Lily stepped closer, her fear giving way to determination. "Whatever it takes, just tell me what I can do." Jonathan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "For now, stay with Oliver. We'll handle this." As she nodded, Jonathan turned to Marcus. "Prepare the team. We're going after that ledger." The ultimate confrontation was drawing closer, and Jonathan knew the stakes had never been higher. But for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope. They weren't just reacting anymore. They were taking the fight to steal. The estate was cloaked in an uneasy quiet as the team regrouped. Marcus had gone to double-check security measures, while Eleanor and Henry ensured that Lily and Oliver remained safe in the nursery. Jonathan stood in the study, the weight of the day's events pressing heavily on his shoulders. In his hand was the napkin Wren had scribbled the address on, the ink smudged but still legible. The location was their best chance at turning the tide against Steele. But the risk was enormous. Steele's men were ruthless, and the facility Wren had described was likely to be fortified and monitored. One misstep, and the consequences could be catastrophic. The door to the study opened softly, and Eleanor stepped inside. She carried 2 steaming mugs, setting one in front of Jonathan before taking the seat across from him. "You've been standing there for over an hour," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "It's not going to get any easier, you know." Jonathan glanced at her, his expression grim. "I'm not sure we're ready for this." Eleanor leaned forward, her hands cradling the mug. "You've prepared for every possibility, and more importantly, you're not doing this alone." Jonathan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not just about being ready. If we fail—" He trailed off, his gaze drifting toward the window. "If we fail, Lily and Oliver will never be safe." Eleanor's voice softened. "You've done more for them than anyone else ever would, Jonathan. And they know that. Whatever happens, they're not facing it without you." He nodded, though the knot in his chest remained. Later that evening, Lily joined Jonathan in the conservatory. The baby monitor she carried emitted soft, rhythmic sounds of Oliver's breathing, a reminder of the fragile life at the center of all this chaos. "You should be resting," Jonathan said, glancing at her as she settled into a chair. "I can't," she admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I see them. Steele's men, the gunfire, everything, it's like it's burned into my mind." Jonathan nodded, understanding the feeling all too well. "It's not easy to forget," he said, "but you can't let it consume you. Fear only makes you weaker." Lily gave a bitter laugh. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not," Jonathan replied, "but fear is a choice. You either let it control you, or you find a way to control it." She was quiet for a moment, her gaze fixed on the darkened garden beyond the glass walls. "Do you ever wonder," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "if this is all too much? That we're fighting a battle we can't win?" Jonathan turned to her, his expression resolute. "I've spent my entire life avoiding battles, Lily. It's easier that way, cleaner. But this, what we're doing now, it's the right fight, and the right fights are always worth it, no matter the cost." Her eyes filled with tears, but she quickly blinked them away. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For not giving up on us," she replied. Jonathan's gaze softened. "I couldn't, even if I wanted to." The team gathered in the study the next morning, the tension palpable as they finalized the plan. Marcus laid out the details, his tone calm but urgent. "The facility is on the outskirts of the city," he explained, pointing to a satellite image on the table. "It's heavily guarded, but the security rotations have predictable gaps. If we time it right, we can get in and out before Steele even knows we were there." "And if we're wrong?" Jonathan asked. "Then we'll have to adapt," Marcus replied. "But I trust my intel, and I trust the team." "We can do this." Jonathan nodded, his expression unreadable. "Let's make it happen." Lily, who had been standing near the door, stepped forward. "I want to help," she said firmly. Jonathan shook his head. "It's too dangerous. You and Oliver are staying here with Eleanor and Henry." "But no," he interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Your job is to stay safe. That's how you help." Lily's shoulders sagged, but she nodded reluctantly. As the team prepared to leave, Jonathan took a moment to check on Oliver. The baby was in the nursery, babbling softly as Eleanor watched over him. Jonathan leaned over the crib, adjusting the blanket. "We're doing this for you," he murmured, his voice low. Eleanor placed a hand on his shoulder. "He'll be proud of you one day. Both of them will." Jonathan didn't reply, but her words settled over him like a quiet reassurance. The drive to the facility was tense, the silence in the car, broken only by the occasional crackle of Marcus's radio. Jonathan sat in the back, his thoughts racing as he mentally reviewed the plan. Every detail had been accounted for, but he knew all too well how quickly plans could unravel in the face of the unexpected. As the city lights gave way to open fields and industrial buildings, Jonathan felt a flicker of determination rise within him. They were heading into the lion's den, but for the first time he felt ready, because this wasn't just about survival, it was about taking back control. The facility loomed ahead, a stark structure surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Floodlights cast harsh beams across the yard, illuminating the patrols that moved in steady intervals. Jonathan watched from the vantage point inside the van, his heart pounding with anticipation. Beside him, Marcus adjusted his earpiece, his focus razor-sharp. "We've got a 10-minute window," Marcus said, pointing to the patrol schedule displayed on the tablet in his hand. "When they rotate, there'll be a blind spot on the northeast side. That's our entry point." Jonathan nodded, checking the small comm device in his ear. "Let's move." The team exited the van in silence, their dark clothing blending into the shadows. Jonathan's breath fogged in the cold air as they made their way to the fence. The security team worked quickly, cutting a small opening and slipping through one by one. Jonathan followed, his pulse quickening as they crossed the yard toward the building. Marcus motioned for the team to stop, holding up a hand as one of the guards approached. They pressed themselves against the wall, barely breathing until the guard passed. Once the coast was clear, Marcus gave the signal and they moved again, reaching the side entrance. One of the security team members, a tech specialist named Sarah, worked on the keypad beside the door. After a tense 30 seconds, the lock clicked open and the team slipped inside. The interior of the facility was eerily quiet, the hum of fluorescent lights the only sound. Jonathan felt the weight of every step as they moved through the narrow corridors, their boots muffled by the concrete floor. Marcus led the way, his hand hovering near his holstered weapon as he checked each corner before signaling the all clear. Sarah paused at a junction, consulting a blueprint on her tablet. "The storage room is down this hall. Second door on the left," she whispered. Jonathan nodded, gripping the small flashlight in his hand. His mind raced with thoughts of Steele, Lily, and Oliver. Every step forward felt like an act of defiance, a reclaiming of control he had thought lost. They reached the door, and Sarah got to work on the lock. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours, every faint sound in the distance making Jonathan's heart race. Finally, the lock clicked, and Sarah pushed the door open. Inside, rows of shelves stretched to the ceiling, each one packed with boxes, files, and unmarked containers. Marcus turned to Jonathan. We'll need to split up. Look for anything labeled with Steele's name, initials, or the words ledger or accounts. The team fanned out, combing through the contents of the shelves. Jonathan's fingers trembled slightly as he opened a box and rifled through its contents. Papers, receipts, and photographs blurred before his eyes as he worked quickly, methodically. "Over here," Sarah called softly, holding up a small, locked briefcase. Marcus joined her, inspecting the case. "This could be it," Marcus said. "We'll take it with us." Jonathan nodded, relief mingling with the tension that still gripped him. "Let's move." As they retraced their steps, the tension in the air grew heavier. Jonathan's instincts screamed that something was off, though he couldn't pinpoint what. The team reached the side door, slipping out into the cold night air, and then the floodlights snapped on. "Down!" Marcus shouted as the first gunshot rang out. Jonathan dove for cover, adrenaline surging through him as bullets ricocheted off the metal walls. Steele's men emerged from the shadows, their weapons trained on the team. "Ambush," Marcus muttered, his jaw tight. They must have been tipped off. The security team returned fire, their movements precise as they provided cover. Jonathan crouched behind a stack of crates, his heart pounding as he tried to process the chaos. "Carter!" Marcus called, tossing him a small device. "Get to the van, we'll cover you." Jonathan hesitated for a split second before nodding. Clutching the device and the briefcase, he sprinted toward the fence, the sound of gunfire echoing around him. The van was waiting just beyond the fence, its engine running. Jonathan slipped through the opening and jumped into the back, slamming the door shut behind him. "Marcus!" he barked into the comm device, his voice sharp with urgency. "We're on our way," Marcus replied, his voice tight. "Hold tight!" Minutes later, Marcus and the rest of the team appeared, retreating under a hail of gunfire. They piled into the van, and the driver hit the gas, the tires screeching as they sped away. The drive back to the estate was tense, the team silent as they processed the events of the night. Jonathan held the briefcase tightly in his lap, his mind racing. They had succeeded in retrieving the potential ledger, but at what cost? Steele's men would retaliate, and the fight was far from over. Back at the estate, Eleanor and Lily were waiting anxiously in the study. Lily rushed to Jonathan as he entered, her eyes wide with worry. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm fine," Jonathan replied, though his exhaustion was evident. "We got what we needed." Marcus set the briefcase on the table, his expression grim. "Let's hope it was worth it." Jonathan nodded, his resolve hardening. The briefcase represented their best chance at stopping Steele and protecting Lily and Oliver for good. Whatever lay ahead, they were ready to face it. The briefcase sat in the center of the study table, an unassuming object that seemed to pulse with the weight of what it might contain. Jonathan stood over it, his hands resting on the edge of the table as Marcus worked the lock. The room was silent, the tension so thick it felt as though even the air had stilled. With a soft click, the lock gave way. Marcus opened the briefcase slowly, revealing a stack of neatly arranged documents and a slim, black ledger. Eleanor, standing nearby, let out a low whistle. "That's it," she murmured. "Steele's Achilles' heel." Marcus pulled on a pair of gloves and lifted the ledger, opening it carefully. His eyes scanned the pages, his expression growing grimmer with each passing second. "It's all here," he said. "Names, dates, transactions. This isn't just incriminating, it's enough to dismantle Steele's entire network." Jonathan exhaled, relief mingled with apprehension. "And it's enough to put a target on us." Eleanor nodded. "Steele will come after this with everything he has. He can't afford to let it fall into the wrong hands." Jonathan straightened, his mind already moving to the next step. "Then we need to make sure it doesn't." The hours that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Marcus coordinated with his contacts, arranging for the ledger to be copied and secured in multiple locations. Jonathan worked with Eleanor to create a contingency plan, ensuring that if Steele's men attacked, everyone knew their role. Lily remained close to Oliver, her worry etched into every movement. She lingered in the study doorway as Jonathan and Marcus discussed their next steps, her arms wrapped protectively around the baby. "Jonathan," she said softly, interrupting the discussion. He turned, his expression softening as he saw her. "What is it?" She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "What happens now? Even if we stop Steele, will we ever really be safe?" Jonathan walked over to her, his gaze steady. "This ends with Steele," he said firmly. "Once his network is dismantled, his power goes with it. You and Oliver will finally have a chance to live without looking over your shoulder." Her eyes searched his face, as though trying to find reassurance in his words. "Finally," she nodded, her grip on Oliver tightening. "Thank you," she whispered. By nightfall, the estate was on high alert. The security team patrolled the grounds with heightened vigilance, their radios crackling softly with updates. Inside, the household was eerily quiet, each person bracing for the confrontation they all knew was coming. Jonathan sat alone in the conservatory, the weight of the past days pressing heavily on him. He thought of William, his brother's idealism and unwavering belief in doing the right thing. For years, Jonathan had dismissed those values as naive, choosing instead to build a life defined by control and isolation. But now, as he fought for Lily and Oliver, he saw the truth in William's perspective, protecting people, standing up against injustice. These were the battles that mattered. Eleanor entered quietly, carrying 2 glasses of wine. She handed one to Jonathan and sat across from him. "You're thinking about him, aren't you?" she asked gently. Jonathan nodded. "William always believed in fighting for what was right. I thought I was smarter for staying out of it. But now," he trailed off, staring into the glass. "Now you're proving him right," Eleanor said, her voice soft but resolute. "He'd be proud of you, Jonathan." Jonathan looked at her, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at his lips. Let's hope this ends the way he would have wanted. As the night deepened, Marcus returned to the study with an update. "We've confirmed Steele's men are mobilizing," he said, his tone grim. "They'll make a move soon." Jonathan straightened. "Are we ready?" "As ready as we can be," Marcus replied. "The security team is in position. The ledger has been secured in multiple locations. If Steele wants it, he'll have to go through us." Jonathan nodded, his resolve hardening. "Then we wait." The first sign of trouble came just after midnight. A flicker on the security monitor caught Marcus's attention, movement near the perimeter. Moments later, the motion sensors triggered an alert, and the team sprang into action. Jonathan joined Marcus in the security room, watching as Steele's men advanced through the shadows. They moved with military precision, their weapons gleaming in the faint moonlight. "They're testing the defenses," Marcus said, "looking for weaknesses." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "They won't find any." The first shots rang out moments later, a sharp crack that echoed through the night. The security team engaged quickly, holding the line as Steele's men attempted to breach the estate. In the nursery, Lily clutched Oliver tightly, her heart pounding as the sounds of the fight reached her ears. Eleanor sat beside her, her calm demeanor a steadying presence. "They'll hold them off," Eleanor said. "Jonathan won't let anything happen to you." Lily nodded, though her fear remained palpable. Back in the security room, Marcus monitored the situation closely, issuing orders to the team through his radio. "They're pushing hard on the east side," he said, "but the team's holding strong." Jonathan watched the monitors, his mind racing. Steele's men were relentless, but the estate's defenses were holding for now. As the minutes dragged on, the attackers began to falter. The security team's precision and preparation had given them the upper hand, forcing Steele's men into retreat. "They're falling back," Marcus reported, his tone triumphant. "We've got them." Jonathan exhaled, the tension in his chest easing slightly. But he knew this wasn't the end. Steele wouldn't stop until he was out of options, and Jonathan was determined to make sure that happened sooner rather than later. As the night settled back into quiet, Jonathan stood on the balcony overlooking the estate. The confrontation had been a victory, but the battle wasn't over. Below, the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon. Jonathan watched as it illuminated the grounds, a symbol of the new day ahead and the fight that still awaited. The estate was quiet, but it was the kind of silence that carried tension in every breath. Jonathan stood in the study, the black ledger resting on the table before him like a loaded weapon. Marcus and Eleanor stood nearby, their expressions grim as they prepared for what they all knew was coming. Steele wasn't one to accept defeat, and the retreat of his men earlier was a clear sign that something bigger was on the horizon. "We have a window," Marcus said, breaking the silence. "We've taken down their first wave, but Steele won't stop." "He knows what's at stake," Jonathan nodded, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "Then we need to end this tonight." Eleanor stepped forward, her voice steady. "You're right. But this isn't just about defense anymore. We need to take the fight to him." Jonathan glanced at the ledger, its pages holding the key to Steele's empire. "The ledger is our weapon," he said. "It's time to use it." An hour later, Marcus's contacts delivered the information they needed. Steele's location had been narrowed down to a private compound outside the city, a heavily guarded fortress that mirrored the man's paranoia and power. It wasn't just a stronghold, it was his sanctuary, the nerve center of his operations. "If we hit him there," Marcus explained, "we can dismantle his entire network. But it won't be easy. He'll be expecting retaliation." Jonathan straightened. "Then we'll make sure he doesn't see it coming." The drive to Steele's compound was tense, the car filled with a heavy silence. Jonathan sat in the back, the ledger resting in a secure case beside him. Marcus drove, his hands steady on the wheel, while two security team members rode ahead in a separate vehicle. As they approached the compound, Jonathan's mind raced. He thought of Lily and Oliver, of the fragile hope they represented. This wasn't just about stopping Steele. It was about giving them a chance at a life free from fear. The compound loomed ahead, its high walls and watchtowers illuminated by floodlights. Marcus parked the car a safe distance away, and the team exited, moving swiftly and silently through the shadows. Jonathan carried the ledger, his grip firm as they approached the perimeter. Sarah, the tech specialist, worked quickly to disable the electronic locks on the gate. Within minutes, they were inside, slipping past the guards with precision. Every step brought them closer to Steele and to the end of this fight. Inside the compound, the tension was palpable. The corridors were dimly lit, the sound of footsteps echoing faintly as the team advanced. Marcus led the way, his weapon drawn, while Jonathan stayed close behind, the ledger clutched tightly in his hands. They reached Steele's office without incident, but the door was locked, its reinforced frame a testament to the man's paranoia. "This might take a minute," Sarah whispered, crouching to work on the lock. Jonathan glanced at Marcus, who nodded. The team took defensive positions, their eyes scanning the hallway for any sign of movement. Just as Sarah cracked the lock, the sound of approaching footsteps sent a ripple of tension through the group. Jonathan's heart pounded as the door swung open, and they rushed inside, closing it behind them. Steele stood behind his desk, his sharp eyes narrowing as Jonathan and the team entered. He was a tall man, his presence commanding even in the face of confrontation. "Well," Steele said, his voice cold, "I wondered how long it would take for you to come to me." Jonathan stepped forward, placing the ledger on the desk between them. "It's over, Steele," he said, his voice steady. "This ledger is the end of your empire." Steele smirked, his gaze flicking to the ledger. You think this changes anything? I built my network on more than just paper. Jonathan met his gaze. This isn't just paper. It's the truth, and once it's out, you'll have nothing left. For a moment, Steele's composure faltered, but then his smirk returned, colder than before. You're a fool if you think this ends with me. People like me don't just disappear. Jonathan leaned forward, his voice low. Maybe not, but they fall, and you're about to learn how hard. Steele's hand moved toward a concealed button on his desk, but Marcus acted faster. He grabbed Steele's wrist, slamming it onto the desk and pinning him down. You've lost, Marcus said, his voice like steel. The next few minutes passed in a blur. Marcus's team secured Steele, while Jonathan retrieved the ledger, ensuring its safety. By the time Steele's remaining guards realized what had happened, it was too late. The team left the compound swiftly, their mission complete. Steele's network was dismantled, his power broken. For the first time, Jonathan felt the weight of victory, heavy but deeply satisfying. Back at the estate, Lily waited anxiously in the study. When Jonathan entered, her eyes filled with relief. Is it over? She asked, her voice trembling. Jonathan nodded, his expression softening. It's over. Lily exhaled, her shoulders sagging as the tension drained from her. She glanced at Oliver, who was fast asleep in her arms. Thank you, she said, her voice breaking, for everything. Jonathan stepped closer, his gaze steady. You don't need to thank me. This was the right fight. And it's a fight I'd choose every time. As dawn broke over the estate, the first light of morning illuminated a world that finally felt free from Steele's shadow. Jonathan stood on the balcony, watching as the sun rose higher, its warmth chasing away the remnants of the night. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace. The battle had been hard fought, but it was worth it, for Lily, for Oliver, and for the man he had become. The morning after Steele's capture was quiet, but it was a quiet filled with the promise of something better. The estate, once cloaked in tension and fear, now seemed lighter, the weight of impending danger lifted. Jonathan stood in the kitchen, a place he had rarely spent time before, watching as Henry poured coffee into 2 mugs. You look like a man who's finally found peace, Henry remarked, handing Jonathan a cup. Jonathan chuckled softly, shaking his head. Peace might be a stretch, but it does feel different. Henry nodded knowingly. Different can be good. Jonathan took the coffee and headed to the conservatory, where he found Lily sitting with Oliver on her lap. The baby babbled happily, his tiny hands reaching for the sunlight streaming through the glass walls. Lily looked up as Jonathan entered, her face breaking into a smile that carried both relief and gratitude. Good morning, she said softly. Jonathan returned the smile. Morning. How's he doing? Lily glanced at Oliver, her expression tender. He's happier than I've seen him in months. I think he knows it's over. Jonathan sat across from her, the coffee warming his hands. It is. Steele's network has been dismantled, and with the evidence we've handed over to the authorities, there's no coming back for him. Lily exhaled deeply, her shoulders relaxing. I don't even know how to thank you. You don't have to, Jonathan replied. You and Oliver deserved this. You deserved safety. She met his gaze, her eyes glistening. You didn't just give us safety. You gave us a chance at a future. Jonathan's chest tightened at her words, the weight of what they had been through settling over him. He nodded, his voice steady. And now, it's time for you to live it. Later that day, Marcus and Eleanor joined Jonathan in the study to discuss the final steps. The ledger had been handed over to law enforcement, and Steele was in custody, his empire crumbling with each passing hour. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression one of satisfaction. I have to say, Marcus began, I didn't think we'd pull this off without more bloodshed. But we did. That's something to be proud of. Jonathan nodded, his gaze thoughtful. It wasn't just me, it was all of us, and now we can start moving forward. Eleanor smiled warmly. And what does moving forward look like for you, Jonathan? Jonathan hesitated, his mind drifting to the changes that had already begun to take root. I'm not sure yet, he admitted. But I know it's not going to look like the life I had before. Eleanor's smile widened. That sounds like a good start. As evening fell, Jonathan found himself on the balcony overlooking the garden. The sky was painted in shades of gold and orange, the setting sun casting long shadows across the estate. He sipped a glass of wine, the quiet hum of the world around him offering a rare sense of tranquility. Lily joined him a few minutes later. Oliver nestled against her chest. She leaned against the railing, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Do you ever wonder," she began, her voice soft, "if everything that happened was meant to lead us here?" Jonathan considered her words carefully. "I think life has a way of forcing us to face what we've been avoiding. For me, that was realizing I couldn't keep living behind walls. For you, it was finding the strength to fight for what mattered." Lily smiled faintly. "And we did it. Together." Jonathan nodded, his chest swelling with a sense of pride and connection he hadn't felt in years. Together. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the estate was quiet once more. But this time, it was the kind of quiet that promised renewal. For Jonathan, Lily, and Oliver, the future stretched ahead, uncertain but filled with hope. And for the first time, Jonathan was ready to embrace it. The weeks that followed Steele's downfall brought a sense of renewal to the estate, though the scars of the ordeal lingered in subtle ways. Jonathan had taken to spending more time in the garden, where the quiet rustling of leaves and chirping of birds provided a comforting rhythm to his days. The world outside had shifted, and so had he. Lily, too, was finding her footing in this new reality. She spent her mornings with Oliver, who had grown more curious and lively each day, and her afternoons considering what the future might hold. She often joined Jonathan in the garden, their conversations ranging from light-hearted observations to the deeper truths they had both faced during their shared journey. On one such afternoon, as they sat beneath the shade of the old oak tree, Lily turned to Jonathan with a thoughtful expression. "What happens now?" she asked. Jonathan set down the pruning shears he'd been holding, his gaze meeting hers. "For you, the world is wide open. You can do anything, go anywhere. And you?" He hesitated, the question settling heavily in the air. "I'm not sure yet," he admitted, "but I know one thing. I don't want to go back to the life I had before. Isolation isn't as satisfying as I once thought." Lily smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting a quiet understanding. "You've changed, you know." Jonathan chuckled softly. "I suppose I have, and I have you and Oliver to thank for that." That evening, Eleanor visited the estate to share news from her network. The fallout from Steele's capture had sent shockwaves through the criminal underworld, dismantling alliances and exposing hidden networks. "You did more than protect Lily and Oliver," she said, her voice carrying a note of pride. "You made the world a little safer." Jonathan poured her a glass of wine, his expression thoughtful. "It wasn't just me, Marcus, the team, you, even Wren, in his own way. It was a collective effort." Eleanor raised her glass. "To collective efforts, then, and to new beginnings." Jonathan clinked his glass against hers, a smile tugging at his lips. In the days that followed, Jonathan began exploring ways to give back in a more tangible sense. Inspired by Lily's resilience and the trials they had faced together, he established a foundation in William's name. Its mission, to support young families in crisis, offering them resources and protection when they had nowhere else to turn. When Jonathan shared the news with Lily, her eyes filled with emotion. "William would have been proud," she said softly. Jonathan nodded, his voice steady. "It's the least I can do to honor his memory and to pay forward what you and Oliver have taught me." As summer settled over the estate, the days grew longer, the sunlight casting a golden glow over the garden in the evenings. Jonathan and Lily often sat together after dinner, Oliver playing nearby as they shared quiet moments of reflection and laughter. One such evening, as the first stars began to appear in the sky, Lily turned to Jonathan. "I used to think the world was only as big as the problems in front of me," she said. "But now I see there's so much more." Jonathan smiled, his gaze following hers toward the horizon. "The trick is holding on to that perspective, even when the problems feel overwhelming." Lily nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I think I'm finally ready to try." Jonathan looked at her, pride swelling in his chest. "You'll do more than try, Lily. You'll thrive." As the night deepened, the household settled into quiet once more, but this time it was a quiet filled with hope. For Jonathan, Lily, and Oliver, the journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but it had also brought them to a place of connection and possibility. And for the first time, they faced the future not as individuals, but as a family bound by the strength they had found in one another. The estate was alive with the sounds of summer, the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze, the faint chirping of birds, and Oliver's delighted giggles as he toddled unsteadily across the garden. Lily hovered nearby, her arms outstretched to catch him if he fell. She laughed softly as Oliver plopped onto the grass, clapping his tiny hands in triumph. Jonathan watched from the terrace, his heart swelling at the sight. He had never imagined his quiet, structured life could be transformed by such small, joyful moments. Yet here he was, savoring each one as if it were a treasure. "You've become quite the spectator," Eleanor remarked as she joined him, her voice teasing but warm. Jonathan chuckled, sipping his coffee. "It's hard to look away. He has a way of reminding you what life is about." Eleanor's gaze softened as she looked at him. "You've come a long way, Jonathan." "I hope you see that." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "For years, I thought the only way to protect myself was to keep everyone at arm's length. But Lily and Oliver, they showed me that connection doesn't weaken you, it makes you stronger." Eleanor smiled. "And now you're passing that strength on to them and to everyone else you've helped with the foundation." Jonathan turned to her, his gaze steady. "It's not just about them. It's about making something lasting, something that matters." Later that afternoon, Lily joined Jonathan on the terrace, Oliver dozing peacefully in her arms. She settled into the chair beside him, her expression serene. "He finally wore himself out," she said with a soft laugh. Jonathan smiled, glancing at the sleeping child. "He's earned it." For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, the warmth of the sun washing over them. Then Lily spoke, her voice hesitant. "I've been thinking about what's next. For me, for Oliver." Jonathan turned to her, his curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" "I've been looking into schools," she said, her tone brightening. "I want to finish my degree, build a future where I can stand on my own 2 feet. Jonathan's chest swelled with pride. "That's a wonderful idea, Lily. What do you need to make it happen?" Lily smiled, her eyes glistening. "You've already given us so much, Jonathan. I want to do this on my own, but knowing you're here, that means everything." He reached over, placing a reassuring hand on hers. "You'll never have to do it alone, not as long as I'm around." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the garden in golden hues, Jonathan found himself reflecting on the journey they had all taken. The fear and chaos that had once consumed them were now distant memories, replaced by a quiet but profound sense of purpose. Lily joined him on the balcony, her gaze fixed on the stars beginning to emerge. "It feels strange," she said softly, "to finally feel safe." Jonathan nodded. "It's not just safety. It's the chance to start over, to build something new." She turned to him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You gave us that chance. You saved us." He shook his head, his voice quiet but firm. "You saved yourselves, Lily. I just helped you see what you were capable of." Lily smiled, and for the first time in months, it reached her eyes. "I'll never forget what you've done for us." Jonathan returned the smile, his heart light. "And I'll never forget what you and Oliver have given me, a reason to believe in something bigger than myself." As the night deepened, the household settled into quiet once more. For Jonathan, Lily, and Oliver, the future stretched ahead, uncertain but filled with possibility, and for the first time they were ready to embrace it together. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of the estate, casting warm, golden hues across the rooms. The day felt different, lighter, as if the weight of the past had finally lifted, leaving only the promise of the future. Jonathan stood in the nursery, watching as Oliver slept peacefully in his crib. His tiny hands were curled into fists, his chest rising and falling with each gentle breath. Lily entered quietly, a smile breaking across her face as she saw Jonathan. "You're becoming a regular in here," she teased softly. Jonathan chuckled, stepping back to allow her to approach. "He's got a way of reminding me what's important." Lily gently adjusted Oliver's blanket before turning to face Jonathan. "We wouldn't have gotten here without you," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "You gave us more than just safety. You gave us hope." Jonathan looked at her, his expression steady but tender. "You and Oliver gave me something too. You reminded me that life doesn't have to be lived alone, that even after loss, there's still room to rebuild." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared journey settling between them like a quiet understanding. Finally, Lily spoke. "We're leaving next week." Jonathan's chest tightened, though he'd known this moment was coming. "Have you decided where?" he asked. Lily nodded, a faint smile on her lips. "I've been accepted into a program at a university nearby. It's everything I need to take the next step." "That's wonderful," Jonathan said, meaning it. "You'll do great things." She stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. "And so will you, Jonathan. You've already started." The following week, the day of their departure arrived. The household gathered to say their goodbyes, each person offering Lily and Oliver heartfelt words of encouragement. Jonathan stood at the base of the grand staircase, watching as Lily handed Oliver to Eleanor for one last hug. As they stepped outside, the sunlight glinting off the car waiting to take them, Lily turned to Jonathan. "I don't know how to say goodbye," she admitted. "Then don't," he replied, his voice steady. "This isn't the end. You'll always have a place here." Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled. "Thank you, Jonathan, for everything." He nodded, his throat tightening as he watched her climb into the car with Oliver. As the vehicle pulled away, he stood on the driveway, his heart heavy but filled with pride. They were moving on, but the bond they had forged would remain. In the weeks that followed, the estate began to change. Jonathan threw himself into his work with the foundation, channeling his energy into creating something lasting in William's name. Families in need began arriving, their lives transformed by the resources and protection the foundation offered. Jonathan found fulfillment in each success story, knowing he was making a tangible difference. Eleanor visited frequently, offering her wisdom and encouragement. "You've built something remarkable. she told him one afternoon as they walked through the garden. William would have been proud. Jonathan nodded, a faint smile on his lips. I think he would have. Months later, Jonathan received a letter from Lily. It was written in her careful handwriting, each word carrying the warmth and gratitude he had come to expect from her. She wrote of her studies, of Oliver's growth and curiosity, and of the life she was building. At the end of the letter, she wrote, "You told me this wasn't goodbye, and you were right. You'll always be part of our story, and I'll always carry what you've taught me. Thank you for showing us that even in the darkest times, there's a way forward." Jonathan folded the letter carefully, placing it in a drawer with a few other treasured mementos. As he sat back in his chair, he glanced out the window, the garden blooming brightly in the afternoon sun. For the first time in years, Jonathan felt not just at peace, but complete. The life he had rebuilt was not what he had imagined, but it was more than he had ever hoped for, and it was just the beginning. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.